Hello again. Welcome back to another episode of 10,000 Steps with Baby. This week, I thought I'd talk a little bit about what I learned between my first labour and my second labour. And the reason I thought I'd talk about this is because next week I'm going to be interviewed by the patient experience team at the hospital where I had both my babies about my experience, and it's going to be like a sort of feedback video for the staff there. So that'll be interesting. But I've been thinking about what I learned in between the two births and what I thought I did right and what I think made things easier the second time around. And I thought I would share that in case it helps anyone else out there. I know when I was pregnant both times, I love to listen to podcasts or YouTube videos about advice for preparing for labour and things to make labour easier. So I just thought I would share my experience. And actually, this topic came up when I had some friends over, and they both have one child at the moment. And they were asking if labour, giving birth, was easier the second time around. And I said that in my experience it was. And, I'm sure there's a whole part of that is because your body's already done it before and it sort of knows what it's doing. But I also think there was a lot of things that I learned from my first labour that I did that made it a lot easier the second time around. So to start with my son, when he was born in 2022, I had a forceps delivery. And with my daughter there, I had a normal vaginal delivery. So if you've got a planned cesarean section, this might not be as useful for you. And of course, the other thing is that I am just a random person on the internet. This is just my experience and tips, but you, of course, need to follow the advice of your midwife or your doctor. They're the experts, not me. Number one, if you're pregnant with your first baby right now, then you're probably wondering what going into labour feels like. Especially because usually in the last few weeks of pregnancy, you get lots of random cramps and Braxton Hicks and sorts of lots of different sensations. And with my first, I spent ages going like, "Oh, is that it? Was that it? Is this it starting?" And I know you'll probably hate me for saying this because I used to listen to pregnancy podcasts and feel enraged when people said this, but it is true that when it starts happening for real, you'll know. And I can't explain it better than that, but it just feels different. It doesn't go away. And you probably won't be second guessing yourself. You'll be like, oh, yeah, this is it. So I'm sorry, that's really annoying, but it's true. And with my son, I started with that feeling at about 6 a.m., actually on his due date. And I thought, okay, great, here we go. I was so done with being heavily pregnant and I was desperate to meet my baby. And in my head, I was like, great, he'll be here in the next 12, maybe 24 hours max. So I was buzzing on adrenaline and I was completely wired and things were going very, very, very slowly. So I was like, yep, let's keep things moving. And we went on a long, long walk and I bounced on the ball and I was too excited to eat. And I didn't really think it mattered because I was like, well, I'm going to have a baby soon, I don't need to eat for 12 hours. And then it got to nighttime and things were still really, really slow, but I was having a contraction, quite a painful one, probably sometimes every 7 minutes, then 5 minutes, and then it wouldn't come for, say, 20 minutes. And they were sore, but not really bad, but it was bad enough that it meant I couldn't go to sleep that night. So by the next morning, it had been 24 hours since things had started, and I hadn't had any sleep, and I'd been walking about and burning calories and not really eating anything. And to cut a very long story short, he wasn't born until 6 p.m. the following day. So that was 60 hours later. And of course, by that point, I was exhausted. When the contractions became more painful, didn't want to eat. So I had no energy in the tank. And at a certain point in hospital, you're usually not allowed to eat in case you need to have surgery. So yeah, I mean, and I don't beat myself up about that. I think it was completely understandable that I was excited and not appreciative of the fact that it could take such a long time. And I'll bet this probably happens to lots of other women too. So the second time round, I had no idea how long labour would last, but I knew I was going to do two things differently. So when I started to get contractions with my second pregnancy, I was out on a walk around the block, and I immediately went home and made myself a huge bowl of pasta. That like Kraft dinner mac and cheese, and I had that and a couple of bars of chocolate to be safe. And the next thing I did was immediately go and climb into bed, and I didn't put an alarm on. I was just planning to sleep as long as I could, and that 100% was a good idea. I was fueled up with loads of easy energy. I'm sure that's not dietitian recommended, those quick and easy carbs, but that's what I wanted and that's what I ate. And I had a really good rest. And later that afternoon, after we'd picked up my son from nursery, we also got a takeaway pizza. And by that point, I was sort of losing interest in food, but I made myself eat a couple of slices for some more calorie dense energy. So that was number one, was I prioritized at the start before things started to get intense. I prioritized rest and getting a whole bunch of calories and food into me. Number two, the second time around, I relaxed into it. With my first, I had just proper ants in my pants. I couldn't sit still. I had this mindset that I needed to keep things moving. So I'm not sure why I thought that, but I did. So I was walking around, I was bouncing on the ball, I had no chill. And this time with my second, I had this mindset of, okay, this might take a really long time. Let's just try and relax as much as possible. Um, so I had a long hot shower, I did a face mask, I got my bedroom all nice and cozy. I lit some candles and I got some peppermint tea in a flask, put music on. And I think this both helped to speed up labor because, the oxytocin and being relaxed. And it also helped to the time to pass faster because I wasn't sort of thinking about how long it was all taking. I wasn't watching the clock in the same way. And similar to that, I had one of these apps on my phone that times your contractions. And with my first, I started using it pretty much straight away from the very first contraction. And just because I was so excited and I thought that was what you should do. And then I had it was really dispiriting because it was like, oh, okay, that was 5 minutes. Oh no, okay, that was 13 minutes. Oh right, oh, it's 20 minutes. Oh, things are slowing down. Oh, are things stopping? Is this not the real deal? And the second time around, I was like, okay, I still want to use one of those contraction timers. They're useful for telling you when you need to go to the hospital, but I only started to use it when the contractions were pretty close together, like much less than every 10 minutes, probably more than like every 4 to 5 minutes. And when they were strong enough that I really had to concentrate on them, that was when I started to actually time them. And it was definitely a sort of situation that, a watch pot never boils. And again, from not instead of timing them so early, it stopped me from thinking, oh, things aren't moving and hyper focusing on something that doesn't add that much value. So those were some things I did differently. Um, Something which I did exactly the same the second time round, and I think this worked really well, was I had a sort of a ladder system of interventions for the pain, and I shared it with Jack, and it was in my birth plan notes. And most importantly, Jack knew it, so I could tell him, okay, I want to move on to the next step, and he could go and grab whatever that was. And I'll put the list in the show notes in case it's helpful for anyone. But essentially, it started with things like stretching and movement, to using a comb, to having a hot water bottle, to some paracetamol, to the TENS machine, gas in your, all the way up to an epidural. And as a side note, if you're going to use a TENS machine, make sure you or your partner read how to make it work best before you need it, because it's slightly more complicated than just popping it on, which is what I thought you did. But of course, one of the biggest things that made it all easier than the first time round was just knowing what to expect and knowing that things were going to get pretty sore, but that it would be over eventually and I would get to have a gorgeous baby by the end of it. And unfortunately, you obviously can't appreciate any of that the first time round. But if anyone is listening who's about to have their first baby and is worried about it, then I hope this helps a little bit as a bit of practical advice. Those would be my top tips. So rest and eat as much as you can in the beginning, because you won't either be able to or you won't want to later on. And even though you're excited and nervous, don't watch the clock and try to have a list of some relaxing things that you can do to pass the time and get the oxytocin going. And it's not very, very bad. You'll be okay, I promise. If you're about to have your second baby, then good luck. I think it definitely is easier. I think, like I said, one, obviously, I think your body is just better prepared for it and you know mentally what to expect. Give your older kid a big cuddle before your second is born, because it's true, they suddenly look absolutely huge and grown up all of a sudden once you come back with a tiny baby. So, yeah, thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions or comments, I'd love to hear them. What would be your biggest labor tip for someone about to have a baby? Is there any advice that you'd share with someone? And if you don't already, I'd love it if you would hit the follow button on whatever podcast platform you're listening on. And I will see you next week, and I will let you know how the patient experience recording goes. Okay, bye now.